week 10 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few kickers. I have his sleeper options this week. The first guy, Dustin Hopkins of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Hopkins so far in the first couple weeks here as a Charger, he's been mediocre with this team here. So week 7 versus New England, he had 7 fantasy points. And last week at Philly, 4 fantasy points because he missed an extra point in that game that hurt him. But right here, week 10, he's got a great matchup. Is Hopkins versus the Minnesota Vikings that give up the 4th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And right here, Hopkins, it was definitely a mistake, obviously, by this Washington football team to get rid of him because now they're on to Joey Sly as their 3rd kicker of the season. And right here, Hopkins, he definitely could kick the deep ball. He's in a high-powered offense, and it's going to be an indoor game here, so it wouldn't surprise me to see him get anywhere from 5 to 9 fantasy points. And he's available in 87% of fantasy leagues, and he's definitely a good sleeper option at kicker this week. The next kicker is Chase Mclaughlin of the Cleveland Browns. So this ball game with the Browns and Patriots, I think could be a field goal battle kind of in this one. And McLaughlin's available in 81% of fantasy leagues. In the last few weeks, he's been pretty solid. Week 7 versus Denver, 7 fantasy points. Week 8 versus the Steelers, 4. And week 9 at Cincinnati, 9. So right here this week, he's another guy that I could pencil in probably anywhere from 6 to 8 fantasy points. We know this Cleveland Brown team, they don't finish a lot of drives with touchdowns this season because McLaughlin, he's had a pretty good year and a top 10 kicker in points this season for fantasy football. And this week in New England, they're a bend but don't break type of defense. And I could see McLaughlin have 2 or 3 chances and a few extra points. So he's definitely a kicker I have as a sleeper this week. And the 3rd and final kicker I have as a sleeper option is Zane Gonzalez of the Carolina Panthers. So I pretty much mentioned him over the last few weeks as a sleeper option, and he hasn't disappointed. Week 8 at Atlanta, 15 fantasy points, and Week 9 versus New England, 7. So right here, Week 10, it's definitely a tough matchup versus his former team, the Arizona Cardinals, that give up the least amount of fantasy points to kickers. But right here, even if Cam Newton's starting in this game, I think it's going to be a little tough for this Panther team to get going on offense and score a lot of touchdowns. So they might have to settle for a few field goals. And Zane Gonzalez, he's been very accurate this season, and I'm sure he has motivation to stick it to his former team a little. We're kicking some big, long field goals in this ball game. So I think Gonzalez in this one could have a decent game, anywhere from 5 to 8 fantasy points, and he's available in 97% of fantasy leagues still. So that's a few kickers I have as sleepers for Week 10 of the fantasy football season.